This evening, Waterstones is so pleased to welcome back Bill Daly to launch his new novel, Double Mortice, which is the second book in his DCI Charlie Anderson series. Blackmail, the first book in the series, was launched in this store last April and reached #1 in the Scottish crime category of Kindle sales, which is a huge achievement worthy of applause. Among the reviews for Blackmail, it was called a story so brilliantly gripping and fast-moving by an author that has a great storytelling ability and characters of such rich credibility, and a piece that hangs you over the precipice of suspense. And the reviews for Double Mortice have been just as strong. Superbly artful misdirection comes increasingly into play. And one reviewer said, and I quote, "I have no qualms in recommending Daly as a great new writer to discover for yourself. His writings are truly a triumph in an increasingly crowded tartan noir bookshelf." So Bill will be signing copies afterwards, which I'm sure you're all looking forward to. But first of all, he's gonna tell us a bit about how he started writing, and then introduces to his terrific new novel Double Mortice. Bill Daly.
Okay, well, but how I started writing, the first novel I actually wrote wasn't a crime novel. It was a humorous spy novel called The Pheasant Plucker, a title you definitely don't want to spoonerise. I wrote that in 2006 when I was living in France and tried the usual round of getting a publisher unsuccessfully, so I decided to self-publish it. In those days, print on demand wasn't readily available, so if you're doing self-publishing, you actually had to print out a couple of hundred books and then take them out to bookshops or try and sell them via a certain website that I'm not allowed to mention in this place, who sells books. So with the able help of my brother-in-law Malcolm, who did all the sales for me in England, I took some books down to the south of France, and the local bookshops in Montpellier, who were living agreed to take some, and sales were ticking over at 2 or 3 a week, nothing much, and suddenly out of the blue I got a phone call from one of the bookshops in Montpellier saying, "Could you provide us with 300 copies of your book within the next week?" So that was a bit intriguing, so I phoned up the guy and said, "Why?" He said, "Well, the professor of English at Montpellier University has picked up your book. He liked it very much. He liked the use of the English language. He liked the fact it was set in Montpellier, so he's decided to make it a set text for all the students taking applied English in Montpellier." Well, that's fine. So I went along and I met the professor and I chatted to him and agreed I'd go along and talk to the students. And as the students had to study 2 books over the course of an academic year, he decided to have a Scottish year. And so the other book he chose was Ian Rankin's Flesh Market Close. So 2 Scottish crime books for the students. I went along and I gave them talks. And if you imagine a sight more surreal than 300 French students competing to see who could say the fastest, "I'm not the pheasant plucker, I'm the pheasant plucker's son, I'm only plucking pheasants till the pheasant plucker comes," without plucking it up. It's quite a triumph. Now, at the end of the academic year, the students actually had to vote on which of the 2 books they preferred. Now, you've got a weak clue as to the outcome of this vote, otherwise why would I be telling the story? But I'm the first to admit this was not a level playing field. This was a 45-degree downhill slope. This was a dark murder set in Edinburgh as opposed to a light-hearted romp based in their own hometown. So when I got round to writing a crime novel, I envisaged a strapline emblazoned across the front, "Voted better than Ian Rankin." But my publisher chickened out. I think he was worried that Ian might sue. When I launched Blackmail here a year ago, I actually rambled on so long I didn't actually leave any time for any questions at the end. So I've been advised tonight to cut down the spiel a little bit so there's time for some questions. But just so there's no misunderstanding, there'll be time for a few questions, but no time for any answers. Last year I talked about my detective, DCI Charlie Anderson. A lot of fictional detectives these days have got some sort of hang up in their personal lives. They're either divorced, they're having an affair, their partner's having an affair, they're drinking too much, their kids are on drugs. Charlie's got none of that hassle. He's just a happily married man. But he's really getting on a bit. He's been 40 years in the force, he's very set in his ways, he still takes his notes in shorthand, he can't handle new techniques like computer technology and profiling techniques. And he's only got 2 years to go till he retires. I see two superintendents down the front laughing here, so they mustn't touching the bone there. So when I first pitched this idea to my publisher, he was very dubious about starting off a series when the main character is only 2 years away from retirement. But my publisher's English. He doesn't realise how much crime you can pack into Glasgow in 2 years. When I decided to base my crime series in Glasgow, I mean, I could hardly claim to have spotted a niche in the marketplace. I mean, everybody and his uncle is writing about crime in Glasgow these days. But there's a very good reason for that, and it's called authenticity. In 2011, I don't know if you actually realise that, but tonight we're actually privileged to be in the homicide capital of Great Britain. Glasgow in 2011, when the book is set, there were 61 murders in the Strathclyde region as it was then, of which 26 in the city of Glasgow itself. And at that time, imagine how many murders that Edinburgh managed to achieve in 2011. I mean, a paltry 12. I mean, it's pathetic. Most of those are probably down to Ian Rankin as well. I mean, Glasgow and Edinburgh really don't have a lot in common. I mean, they're totally different cities. Even the use of language is different between the two cities. I mean, words like the word breeding. In Edinburgh, that means good form. In Glasgow, it means good fun. Takes a while. Kevin Bridges, the Glasgow stand-up, summed it up very well. He said, Edinburgh and Glasgow are totally different cities. In Edinburgh, when a gun goes off, it's 1 o'clock. To go on to Double Mortice, the book I want you here tonight. So this is the second in the DCI Charlie Anderson series. And a lot of the action is based around a fictional new tower block that's been built in Clydeside. On the top floor, a lawyer, Michael Gibson, and his wife live. And according to the blurb, rich, successful and married, with a beautiful mistress on the side, top Glasgow lawyer Michael Gibson is to all appearances an enviable man. But on the inside, his life is falling apart. Philippa, his lover, is demanding he gets a divorce, but his wife refuses to cooperate. Meanwhile, an event from his shady past threatens to resurface and wipe out everything he's achieved. Worst of all, one of the city's most notorious psychopaths, Jack McFarlane, a man whom Gibson has good reason to fear, is back on the streets. When Gibson's wife goes missing, DCI Charlie Anderson has to establish if he's dealing with a case of abduction, suicide, or murder. So a lot of mysterious, funny things going to go on in this tower block. I'd like to read you one extract from the book tonight, but rather than sort of dip into the plot itself, which wouldn't make much sense out of context, I'd like to introduce you to one of the characters, a guy called Harry Kennedy. He's the caretaker in this new block of flats. And we join the story when Harry is going to the pub at lunchtime for a pint. It's a snowy February day in Glasgow. Harry Kennedy edged his way along the towpath, testing each footstep before carefully committing his full weight, while at the same time trying to avoid the deep snow cascading over the top of his Wellingtons. The wind whipping off the river was stinging his eyes, and ridges of frost were forming on his moustache and his eyebrows. Harry gripped the guardrail tightly to make sure he didn't stray off the invisible path. 10 feet below, to his left, the icy waters of the Clyde were lapping against the bank. When he got to the pub, Harry kicked off his boots against the low wall to dislodge the wet snow, before pushing the door open. Blinking his eyes to adjust to the dim light, he realised he was the only customer. "Well, if it isn't Harry Kennedy," the barman called out, folding his newspaper and getting to his feet. Harry tugged off his raincoat as he dripped his way across to the bar. Though small of stature, he weighed over 13 stones and had the build of a rugby prop forward. Legs and arms like tree trunks, broad square shoulders and a barrel chest. His head seemed to connect directly to his body, with no discernible sign of an intervening neck. His complexion was ruddy, and a permanent impish grin lit up his features. "It's been so long since I've seen you," the barman said. "I was beginning to think you'd gone in the wagon." "Don't sound so surprised, Tommy. I'll have you know that I once went for 7 years without touching a single drop." "When was that?" "Ach, it was a while back. Then I said to myself, what the hell? Everybody else is enjoying my 7th birthday party. Why shouldn't I?" "Same old Harry," Tommy chortled. "What are you having?" "A pie and a pint of heavy, please." Clambering onto a high bar stool, Harry draped his sodden coat over the adjacent stool and pulled out a tissue to dab the melting ice from his eyebrows and his moustache. He glanced round the bar. It's been quite a while since I've been in here right enough. It was such a long drag from the school. But my new job's just along the road, so you'll be seeing a lot more of me. I'm delighted to hear that. Tommy wiped his hands on a bar towel before opening the glass display cabinet and sliding a mutton pie onto a plate, which he popped into the microwave. Crossing to the hand pump, he started to pull a pint of heavy. A new job, eh? So you're not still working at the school? I retired from the Janton last month, but I filmed my feet all right. I saw a job advertised for a facilities manager for yon new block of flats down the road. You ken the one I mean? It's called Dalglish Tower. 15 floors of plate glass beside the river. I've seen it. Hey, that was lucky getting another job as quick as that. You're not wrong there. I must tell you about the interview, but it was a bloody scream. Harry's eyes sparkled as he recalled his story. About a week after I'd sent in my application, I got a letter telling me to go to the View Park Estate Agency in Hope Street for an interview with Mr. Chalmers. So I gets myself all dolled up and I donners down to Hope Street. Chalmers turns out to be one of the English chanty rasslers for Chichester, he told me. With a laddie the accent you could cut with a knife. You ken the kind I mean, Kelvin side only worse. I know the type well. Anyway, Chalmers starts off. Do you know why we decided to call the building Dalglish Tower, Mr. Kennedy? I comes back quick as a flash. You'll have named it after Kenny, I suppose. Then I added, you do realise, Mr. Chalmers, that Kenny played for Celtic, so calling it Dalglish Tower will alienate the Rangers fans. Do you notice that nice wee touch there, Tommy? Alienate. I decided to slip a few big words into the conversation so Chalmers wouldn't think he was dealing with some wee ignorant Glasgow Keeley. And they're the majority of your potential customers, I says. Good stuff, eh? Majority and potential in the same sentence. Really flogging the old vocabulary for all it was worth I was. Might it not be better to call it Mo Johnson Tower, says me with a straight face, since Mo played for both Celtic and Rangers? I said that to him. I did, honest. He just sat there looking flummoxed. He hadn't a bloody clue what I was whittering on about. No that I'm in any way bothered myself, I added. I'm a thistle man through and through. Tommy smiled as he set Harry's pint down in front of him. Grinning broadly, Harry took a sip before continuing. So Chalmers clears his throat and says, dead posh-like, actually, Mr. Kennedy, we named the building after the 4th Earl of Dalglish. It was on the tip of my tongue to say, oh, aye, what team did he play for? But couldn't have done that without bursting out laughing. After that, I thought I'd better screw the nut. I mean, I did want the job after all. So I just nodded and said, oh, the 4th Earl of Dalglish, was it? Oh, that'll be all right then. That shouldn't upset anybody. Chalmers went on to ask me a few questions about what kind of work I'd been doing at the school. Then he offered me the job, just like that. He said he liked my acerbic wit. I'm sure he did that on purpose, the sarky bugger. He can't find wheel, I'd have to go and look that one up. As sort of inferred in that extract, as well as being the homicide capital of Britain, Glasgow has more or less cornered the market in religious bigotry. I mean, no one does bigotry better than Glaswegians. I actually arrived back in Glasgow earlier this month after 30 years in France, and somebody asked me for my email address. I still got my French email address, so I told him it was bill.daly@orange.fr. He just looked at me and said, you'll not be wanting to keep that email address when you're back in Glasgow. In his book Laidlaw, Willie McIlvanney, who's the father of Tartan Noir, he summed up the Glasgow attitude to bigotry much better than I ever could, which, by the way, is really irritating. Where Laidlaw says, what I've got against folk like Lawson isn't that they're wrong, it's just that they assume that they're right. Bigotry is just unearned certainty. I mean, that sums up your Glaswegian. I mean, he knows he's right, and therefore, de facto, anyone who disagrees with him is wrong. I'd like to finish this with a Billy Connolly story. I first saw Billy Connolly in the 1970s, when he split up in the Humble Bums. He was doing his tour of the Glasgow pubs, doing his one-man show. And a few of us from work used to sort of follow him around the circuit. I actually got to know him enough to phone him up and ask him where he was going to perform in the following week. And he got to know us and he used to sort of have a chat to us at half-time interval and ask which of his routines he should do in the second half, depending on what sort of audience he had. A lot of his routines at that time centred around religious bigotry. They dropped most of those once he got onto the international stage. But I like the story about the Grand Master of the Orange Lodge in Govan. His daughter came home with the worst news possible. She wanted to marry a Catholic. He was going to have none of it at all. But she threatened, if he didn't allow her to do it, she was going to elope and get married in the chapel. So finally they agreed on a compromise, that he'd agree to the marriage as long as the service was in Govan Register Office. So that happened, and Conley told the story that he was the best man, and he and a few of his mates went along to support the groom. And afterwards, the reception was back at the bride's father's house in Govan. So they all traipsed back there, and Conley and his mates were standing along one side of the room, main room, and the other side was the bride's brothers and cousins all looking at each other. Never been that close to each other like knuckle dusters before. After a while, the atmosphere mellowed a bit once the music was playing and the booze was flowing. So a couple of hours later, the bride's father stormed into the room and switched off the music. Said, "Right, everybody, get out of here. One of those bastards has shagged the bride." And Conley said, "This is going to get messy very, very quickly, so we better get the hell out of here." So they raced for the front door and walking down the path, and the bride's father appeared in the door and said, "Right, stop! It's all right. You can all come back in." He's apologised. So that's the Glasgow back in now after 40 years of it.